Okay, ready to go. Right, okay. This is a quick diagram section which I'm doing in the garden. You can hear the birds. The classic diagram, long run aggregate supply, AD moves from AD to AD dash. We get non-inflationary growth from there to there. Then we get a trade-off between inflation and economic growth. Up here, we're starting to move into demand pull inflation territory, and between AD triple dash and AD quadruple dash, we're getting demand pull inflation. Examiners love that diagram, okay? Increasing G, multiple accelerator. If we don't shift out the ES curve, that will eventually to demand pull inflation. If the output gap is really big, we don't really need to worry about it. Remember the output gap? I call this the recession diagram. It's not really called the recession diagram, but if AD is all the way down here, this means that actual GDP is much less than potential GDP. You should also be able to draw the positive output gap diagrams and negative output diagrams. You should also know that in 2024, our output gap is close to zero, even though in 2023 we had a recession. Okay, so we can draw the negative output gap diagram here. I should really have a line down here saying RNY. Positive output gap. This is a positive output gap diagram with the definition that actual GDP, which is here, is greater than potential GDP. That is the definition of a positive output gap. Clearly then we're going to get demand pull inflation. 2022-23 and actually 2021 as well, we had a positive output gap. In 2023 we came out of a recession, and in 2024 we got a zero output gap. Okay, a negative output gap is we are there. This is potential GDP, this is actual GDP, therefore we have a negative output gap, or you can draw it like this with demand pull inflation. Okay, slide 3. Okay, monetarist ASAD is simply straight line, right? We move from there to there. That's really good. Prices will fall, etc. Good stuff. Or you can draw the Keynesian diagram. Always tend to draw the Keynesian diagram in an exam, is where AS and AD go out together. Okay, that's really good. Sorry, once again, I should be labeling all of these, but I'm in a rush. Okay, so real national income there. Monetarism free market supply side, it's all about increasing AS and increasing the underlying trend rates of growth. Free market supply side is about growth, growth, growth. There is no conflict if you believe in these policies, even though over the last 40 years, growth has always fallen every single decade. So maybe this hasn't always worked, but it's all about increasing the AS curve. Then we can increase demand without getting demand pull inflation. Number 4. Okay, so we go to the Phillips curve. This is a little bit more complicated. There's a classic trade-off here between inflation and unemployment. There's an inverse relationship between the two. High inflation means low unemployment. That's a choice that we could have. And then the monetarists came in with the long-run Phillips curve, which says there is no trade-off. Okay, so if you can reduce the natural rate of unemployment, then we can lower that. How do you reduce the natural rate of unemployment? Free market supply side, childcare, training, zero-hour contracts, reduce power of the trade unions, decrease welfare payments, decrease income tax. Okay. You could also explain the long-run Phillips curve, A, B, C. Right, it's also in your notes, obviously. If you increase AD, unemployment falls, but then workers don't realise that inflation's gone up at the same time. They're suffering from money illusion, and once they realise that their wages haven't gone up, they then withdraw themselves from the labour market. Okay, so eventually end up with C. So therefore that means it's completely pointless increasing AD. Okay, next diagram. Okay, this is the interventionist diagram. We increase AS and increase AD in Green Revolution, NHS. We spend more money on infrastructure. The AS curve shoots out, increases productivity. We can increase AD and we can get non-inflationary growth. Of course, if you spend 2 trillion quid on a Green Revolution, it doesn't work, then that's going to increase your national debt. That's a drawback of it. Right, between 2009 and 2019, just a bit of historical context here, we had austerity. That means we were decreasing G, but we could have actually borrowed money at virtually 0%, and that is the time we should have been increasing G on infrastructure and everything else. Remember here, there is no conflict, right? Everything gets better. We get economic growth, we get more jobs, we get price stability, and if we have more investment, we'll also sell more goods abroad. Use these diagrams all the time. And productivity. Next up is the productivity diagram, I think. Yeah, so productivity goes up. It literally also means that the AS curve will go up. Right. Enterprise, investment, productivity, technology, innovation will all shift out the long-run aggregate supply curve. Right, if productivity goes up, it's the only thing that shifts out the short-run aggregate supply curve as well, straight away, because we can produce more per good. The definition of productivity is output divided by input or output divided by labour. Productivity is key for any economy. but we're really bad at it in the UK where it's hardly growing. We are 28% less than America, and we're 18% less than France and Germany. Good figures to quote in the exam. This is from the London School of Economics 2022, where the whole paper was based on we should increase investment. Okay, next one on here is unemployment. We got real wage unemployment. Real wage unemployment is just like the minimum wage diagram, but it's real wage unemployment. The reason why we have real wage unemployment is because of wage rigidity, also because of minimum prices, minimum wages, and also because the trade unions are too strong. Okay, a bit like a micro diagram, but it's called real wage unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is where there's a lack of aggregate demand in the economy. This is the Phillips curve, and this is the natural rate of unemployment decrease in the long run Phillips curve. So these are all diagrams that we can use in terms of unemployment. Okay, if we want to reduce unemployment, in 2009, we had to increase AD because we had cyclical unemployment. But in 2024, we might have free market supply side unemployment. So in this case, it's not about increasing demand, it's improving labour productivity by better training for bricklayers, programmers, nurses, doctors, and then that will shift out the AS curve. Okay, so it depends upon the situation that you're in. If it's a massive negative output gap, you reduce unemployment by increasing AD. If it's free market supply side, you're up against constraints, then we need to use free market supply side policies. Next one on here is inflation, all the diagrams. This is the cost push inflation diagram. Easy. This is the demand pull inflation, positive output gap, or up here. Okay, or we can use F equals PT, which you're probably not so good on, and what they said, an increase in the money supply will lead to a rise in inflation, M, because M, the money supply goes up, V, velocity of circulation is stable, is equal to P goes up, T is stable, therefore an increase in the money supply leads to inflation. This is a Manchester argument again. We can draw the diagram for that, which you should know. So if you increase AD, eventually that will just lead to more inflation, so there's no point in increasing AD. Because you increase AD, we move to B, so unemployment falls, but then there's a shortage of labour in the labour market, less labour in the labour market, therefore the workers will ask for more money, therefore the SRS will move upwards from here to here. Okay, number 9. Okay, international trade. That is a subsidy diagram. Demand and supply, really, really simple. Therefore, we'll sell more exports because prices are cheaper. So therefore, that will increase AD. So the multiplier accelerator. Or we can have the quota diagram, which is we import Q1 to Q4, then you have a quota. We only want to import Q2 to Q3. So that's the quota diagram. This will increase the price. Therefore, the home supplier will supply more goods because they get a higher price for their goods. So therefore, we will import only Q2, Q3, rather than Q1, Q4 because of the quota. This is the tariff diagram, which I'm sure you all know, but we can use this in terms of the free trade diagram, a trade creation diagram, or a tariff diagram. Next one up, absolute advantage, comparative advantage. Right, I'm sure you know all these numbers on here, 10, 5, 5, 10, 30, 15, 5 and 10. Learn the numbers. We want to trade because we eventually end up with this. These numbers are harder than these numbers, and even with comparative advantage, which is when you have an absolute advantage in both products that you will trade. Advantages of free trade diagram, absolute and comparative advantage, more competition, more dynamic efficiency. However, protectionism is all about infinite industry, strategic trade theory, dumping, and China electric cars. Okay, so we want to protect infinite industry to allow them to grow. Even in the UK, that's the renewable sector. Strategic industries, those industries that make steel, we need that, or agricultural sector, we will protect those. Dumping is when you sell cars at below cost price, or sell anything at below cost price. That's called dumping. There's a legitimate reason for protectionism. There's a big issue in the world right now with Chinese electric cars. America's put 100% tariff on them because they'll actually smash the European and the American car market because they can sell them at 15,000 quid rather than a Tesla is costing 40,000 quid. That is protectionism. Okay, next up, number 11 on here is exchange rates. Okay, the exchange rate is determined by the demand and supply of sterling. So if you have a trade deficit, then the exchange rate will fall because imports will be greater than exports. If you have a trade surplus, then the exchange rate will rise because exports will be greater than imports. Remember, the demand for sterling is linked to the exports. So every time we sell an export, if you want to buy a British car, we have to change euros into sterling. Therefore, the demand for sterling will go up. Hopefully you know all of this. Right, 4 factors affecting trade surplus: increase in interest rates, hot money comes into the UK, more FDI comes into the UK, speculators suddenly want to buy sterling, and also a trade surplus. So that is how the exchange rate is determined. Simple supply and demand. Okay, demand side shock, just a decrease in AD, really easy. A supply side shock, a decrease in AS. You can also have a positive supply side shock where the AS curve jumps out the other way, e.g. artificial intelligence or something like that. But the supply side shocks tend to be like prices going up. Okay, number 13, this is the circular flow of income on here. These are injections, government expenditure, investment, exports coming into the economy, going out of the economy, taxes, savings and imports. Okay, households and firms. So households provide factors of production like labour. In return, they get money for that. And in return, they then spend the money. And in return, they get goods and services. So that is a circular flow of income. Okay, getting towards the end now. We have good deflation, which is the AS curve moving out. So we have bad deflation, which is a fall in aggregate demand, which is obviously clearly bad. This is because of a rise in productivity. Therefore, we can produce goods more cheaply. Deflation is negative inflation. People stop spending because prices are going down. And there will also be an increase in savings, even with 0% interest rate, because money increases in value. And if you have loads of debt, then that's a real problem. Remember, we have 40% personal debt in the UK. All your debts will become bigger and bigger. Bad deflation. Okay, we're near the end now. Floating exchange rate, decrease in the exchange rate, export prices fall, import prices rise. Remember, get it right. Increase in AD, economic growth goes up, employment goes up, improves trade deficit, cost push inflation. Okay, obviously a floating high exchange rate will get the opposite effect. But if it's falling, we can talk about the Marshall-Lerner equation, which I'm sure you all know. The sum of exports and import elasticities are greater than 1, then the balance of payments will improve. This leads us to the J curve. The J curve, we've got a trade deficit. It will get worse before it gets better because the import and export elasticities will be less than 1 in the short term. However, in the UK right now, even the falling exchange rate, we have a record trade deficit. Right, 2 more to go. Money, banking, credit creation. I quite like this. Assets and liabilities. You put 1,000 quid into the bank. Assets go up by 1,000 quid, cash, deposits. If the bank does nothing with it, that is very safe. However, assets and liabilities, if we have a cash ratio of 10%, the credit multiplier is 10. If it's 1%, the credit multiplier is 100. Obviously, we put 1,000 quid. 1,000 times 10 is 10,000 quid. Use the example. So £1,000 for the cash, loans of 9,000 quid, created deposits of £10,000. Okay? So that shows how the money supply can go up due to banks lending money. Hopefully you understand the credit creation process. If you don't, watch the money banking video. And those are all the diagrams needed for paper 2. Thank you.